Hi, my name is Renee Lyles. I'm a chef and registered dietitian nutritionist. This video is going to cover food procurement on a budget. I'm going to give you some guidance for working with a low-cost food plan. We'll learn how to read a nutrition label. I'll provide some tips for finding nutrient-dense ingredients at local grocery stores. We'll talk about how to minimize food waste, and I'm going to give you a knife skills demonstration at the end. Let's go ahead and get started. I think it's useful for us to begin with the MyPlate diagram. So this is a teaching tool that's provided by the USDA, and it's a really simple template that just allows us to show our patients or our students or clients kind of what a general, healthy, nutrient-dense meal might look like as it's laid out on the plate. So they suggest that half the plate be filled with fruits and vegetables, a quarter of the plate be grains, another quarter protein, roughly, and then to include dairy or a dairy substitute for calcium and vitamin D. So I find this to be a useful template that just helps the patient to visualize. The USDA also puts out a cost of food monthly report, and this report suggests a low-cost food plan, a moderate cost plan, and a liberal plan. And so they give you actual dollar amounts with different age categories. And the low-cost plan is actually the information or the data that is used to inform how much SNAP recipients receive. So let's take a closer look at these. For a male ages 19 to 50 years old, if they're on a low-cost food plan, they would have $68 a week to spend on groceries or $294.50. For a female in that same category, they would have $58.90 to spend weekly or $255.40. So I want you to think about your own grocery bill, what you would spend per week or per month at the grocery store. And I just want you to think about, maybe what your patients have to spend as well. And then the recommendations that you make, consider if those are realistic for the budget that your patient would be on. So I think this is a helpful chart, so you can pause the video and look a little bit closer at it if you would like to. All right, so after we understand how much money we have to spend, we then need to go to the grocery store and search for nutrient-dense foods for the low-cost food plan. So our goals for this is going to be to make a plan and stick to the list. There's no room in the budget for, impulse buys or, extra, candy at the checkout aisle or anything like that. It really is a very strict budget that if you are going to receive adequate fruits and vegetables, there's not very much room for error. We do want to minimize the use of added value foods in order to keep this grocery bill low. This is going to be a really handy tool or a trick in order to do this. We want to focus on hydrating with inexpensive, nutrient-dense, low-sugar liquids like water or a protein-rich milk or a non-dairy substitute. We can also take advantage of bulk purchase pricing and really try to avoid those individually packaged foods. This is a convenience that you are going to pay for in the end. And of course, we want to reduce food waste. Okay, so I talked about minimizing the use of added value foods. Added value foods are ingredients that have undergone some kind of processing that's made them more user-friendly to the consumer. But this added value comes with a price tag. This convenience is going to cost the consumer. And we'll talk more in detail about these in a couple slides. All right, so what is in the grocery store? Let's first talk about the least expensive ingredient. We have grains, beans, and legumes. The less processing that they undergo, the least or less expensive they are going to be generally. I'm speaking in very general terms here. Once you start adding value or processing to make these grains more convenient, that cost is passed on to the consumer. So buying dry, uncooked or grains that are not par cooked, this is a really good way to save money, although it will cost the consumer more time in the kitchen. So that is a trade-off. You really have to weigh that trade-off. For the next more expensive items, produce and dairy generally fall in these categories. And then meat, fish, and poultry are usually the most expensive, while simultaneously they're very nutrient dense. The protein is very bioavailable, and important micronutrients like vitamin D, B12, iron, and many others are readily available, and often more so than plants many times. Eggs are generally a really rich protein source that's inexpensive. They're highly versatile in the kitchen, although as of late, these prices have been increasing. Remember that added processing for any of these ingredient categories is generally going to increase cost. Sometimes too, the nutrition content can be affected, usually in terms for meat, especially with a higher sodium concentration, or the removal of some vitamins and minerals, as is true with the processing of grains. From a chef's perspective, I think a really well-composed dish is going to utilize all of these ingredients in order to satisfy our appetites and provide nourishment. We really want to try to include all of these categories on the plate. And it's important to understand how the cost of each of them will help you balance the cost of a meal while still providing all of the nutrient density and the nutrients that you need. Using a variety of ingredients can also provide textural contrast and visual interest, and it really makes for a more pleasing eating experience. So I really try to include each of these categories in every dish and every meal that I make. Okay, so back to added value foods. I mentioned before that these are ingredients that have undergone some type of processing, and they've become more user-friendly or more convenient to the consumer. But of course, these costs are passed on to the consumer. So I wanted to do a little experiment. I went to 2 grocery stores that were within 1 mile of UIC's West Campus. I wanted to see what was available to folks in our community. Where do they shop? And what produce or what food items do they actually have access to? I did this because I want to make sure that my recommendations are relevant to our target audience. So let's just compare broccoli. So I went to Jewel on Roosevelt, and I found some pre-washed and pre-cut fresh broccoli in the convenience produce section. It's prepackaged. All you have to do is open the package and eat it. It was listed at $4.99 per pound, making it 31 cents per ounce. There was also fresh broccoli stems just a little ways down the aisle. Less convenient. You have to take it home, wash it yourself, and cut it. This was about half the price, 16 cents per ounce. Organic fresh broccoli with the stems was only 17 cents per ounce, and frozen chopped broccoli came in at the lowest cost per ounce, only 12 cents. So you can see here how convenience really does impact the cost. With frozen, this is probably the best option. I think really what's compromised here is the texture. If you like that snap of broccoli, of a fresh stem of broccoli, you're probably not going to get that if it is frozen, just because those cell walls have collapsed due to the expansion of the ice crystals during freezing and then the release of that liquid in the cell's tissue. So if texture is really a big deal, maybe fresh is going to be the best, but there is no difference in nutrient density. So both the frozen broccoli and the fresh broccoli are going to be just as nutrient dense. All right, so you've heard me use this term processing. What are processed foods? These are foods that have undergone any change to their natural state. So really, all foods are going to be processed. We don't usually buy raw agricultural commodities. So washing and cleaning, milling, cutting, chopping, mixing, heating, pasteurization, blanching, cooking, canning, freezing, drying, dehydrating, packaging, all of these are going to alter food from their natural state as it grows on the farm. The food may also include the addition of other ingredients like preservatives, flavors, nutrients, and other food additives or substances that are approved for use in food products. Think spices, salt, sugar, and fats. Ultra-processed foods are a little different. There is a very specific definition for these. So ultra-processed foods are industrial formulations typically with 5 or more and usually many ingredients. This goes beyond salt, sugar, oils, and fats. The ingredients in the ultra-processed foods include substances that are not commonly used in culinary preparations, like hydrolyzed proteins, modified starches, hydrogenated oils, additives maybe whose purposes are to imitate sensory qualities of unprocessed or minimally processed foods, or to disguise undesirable qualities in the final product. So things like colorants, flavorings, non-nutritive sweeteners, emulsifiers, humectants, sequestrants, things like that, anti-caking, anti-glazing agents. So these are very useful in the food industry for presenting a product that a consumer is enticed to buy, but just understand what the definition is here and the differences. So the bottom line really is that food processing is going to happen on a spectrum, and it ranges from basic technologies like freezing and milling to the incorporation of additives that are going to promote shelf stability and increase palatability. So as a general rule, I really try to emphasize minimally processed foods in the diet. That said, the use of processed foods is the choice of the consumer, and really there are pros and cons with each type. You are going to find that more convenient foods usually have more processing. And I think the nutrition fact label and ingredients list can be a really useful tool when we're trying to decide if we want to include a processed food in our diet or not. I'm not going to tell you that they're all bad. So this is really, the cost-benefit analysis that the consumer has to run, depending on how much time and how many resources they have in order to prepare foods from scratch, or if they need to utilize that more convenient option. Okay, so what are some examples of ultra-processed foods? These would be things like soda or a lemonade or an orangeade or something like that. A juice drink, something that's not 100% juice, and usually has other stabilizers or thickeners or added sugar, things like that. Crackers, chips, candy, packaged cakes, cookies, pies, and treats. Remember that the added value is convenience, not nutrition value in many cases. So looking at the ingredient list, I have this here for the golden round crackers found at Aldi's for $2.19, as well as the nutrition fact panel is really a good idea for making that decision of, is this nutrient dense and does it belong in my grocery cart? You really want to avoid adding items to the grocery cart that are going to rack up your bill without providing very much nutrition. So these crackers really offer very little nutrition. There's no fiber, very little protein. Vitamin D, calcium, and potassium are absent, and there is only 4% of the daily value of iron. So this maybe isn't something that we would consider very nutrient dense, but it is a processed food that many folks enjoy. So again, kind of assessing the benefits and the costs with that. And since we talked about the nutrition fact panel in the last slide, let's break this down a little bit more to try to understand it. So I always like to start at the top of the label. The size of the serving on the food package is going to influence the number of calories and all of the nutrient amounts that are listed on the top part of the label. And the serving size has to be based on the amount of food and drink that people will typically consume, not how much they should consume. So notice that on this label, one serving is 1.5 cups. If you ate the whole package, you would be eating 3 cups. And so that would double the calories and the other nutrition that is shown on the sample label. Okay, so moving down the label, calories are going to provide a measure of how much energy you're going to get from this serving of food. So the calories are listed here in large print. We also want to take care to limit the nutrients in the next section that are highlighted here in yellow. Remember that eating too much fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, or sodium may increase your risk of certain chronic diseases like heart diseases, some cancers, high blood pressure. So no more than 35% of your total calories should come from fat. So we want to make sure we choose these wisely. So we're looking for those monounsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids. Moving down the label, we want to make sure that we are getting enough dietary fiber, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. Eating enough of these nutrients can improve your health and help reduce the risk of some diseases and conditions. And a quick note about the daily values. If it's listed as 5% or less, this is considered low. 20% or more is considered high. And the percent daily values are based on the daily value recommendations for key nutrients, but only for a 2,000 calorie diet. So this is kind of a very generalized percentage. This slide just lists some common micronutrient deficiencies that we see. We list the RDA here as well, and foods that would provide some of these nutrients. And so you could refer back to this if this is helpful for a patient that you're seeing. I mentioned before that meat, poultry, and seafood are going to be the most expensive category of foods on the food budget. And so I wanted to look a little bit closer at this to see what was in our local grocery stores and compare the cost of plant-based protein to a less processed animal protein per gram. So gram for gram, I wanted to look at the cost of each of these. So again, I went to two local grocery stores here very close to UIC's campus, Jewel and Aldi's. And so you can see here, I was able to find tofu, an Impossible Burger, ground chicken, ground beef, and ground turkey. And so in this chart, I calculate the cost of 4 ounces of each of these proteins. So the lean ground beef came in at $1.38 for 4 ounces, and that would be 1 serving. 4 ounces of lean ground turkey was 92 cents. The ground chicken was 86 cents. The tofu was 86 cents. I added black beans to this as well, 16 cents, and the Beyond Burger was $3.08 for a 4-ounce serving. So you can see here, cost-wise, black beans are certainly going to be the least expensive for 4 ounces. Then I wanted to compare the grams of protein per 4-ounce serving. So which of these are going to give us the most protein? So the ground beef is going to give us 30.7 grams, the same for the turkey. Ground chicken came in at 19.8 grams of protein per serving, 19.6 grams for the tofu. Black beans did not score as highly, 9.3 grams, and the Beyond Burger offered 20.3 grams of protein per that 4-ounce serving. And this data was supplied by Cronometer. From here, we can look at the cost per gram of each type of protein. So for ground beef, it was 4.5 cents. Turkey, 2.9 cents. Ground chicken, 4.3 cents. Tofu, 4.4 cents. Black beans, 1.7 cents. And for the Beyond Burger, it was 15.2 cents per 1 gram of protein. And so to calculate this, I divided the cost of the 4 ounces of meat by the grams of protein that it provided. And finally, I have a chart showing the cost for 30 grams of each protein. So lean ground beef came in at $1.35, turkey, 87 cents, ground chicken, $1.29, tofu, $1.32, black beans, 51 cents, and the Beyond Burger was $4.56. So I want us to consider the trade-offs here. While animal-based protein may have heme iron that is more available and the protein itself may be more bioavailable, many of the plant-based proteins also are going to provide additional fiber that the lean animal proteins do not. So just something to consider there. Both can be very nutrient-dense, and I've showed you which contains more protein and which is kind of a better bang for your buck. So with this exercise, I just want us to consider which protein we're really getting the best value from and what's going to be most acceptable to our patients. We also want to check the nutrition labels. We're looking for sodium content, especially in the more processed options. The Beyond Burger is going to be a more processed food and potentially higher in sodium. We also want to think about, where our patients are going to do their shopping. Is the protein item that we're recommending readily available to them? This is what I was able to find in local grocery stores. So these are just a few trade-offs that you can consider as you are speaking with your patients. Convenience is likely another thing that your patients are really going to care a lot about. They have the option of eating out or cooking at home. And so I wanted to just do another exercise to kind of compare what it would be to eat out versus cooking at home. And these results actually might surprise you. I think oftentimes we think, oh, cooking at home is going to definitely be cheaper. It might be more nutrient dense, but unfortunately sometimes it's not cheaper. And this is an example that I just wanted to provide for you. Again, this is to help you understand what options your patient is going to be weighing in their mind. And I want you to also consider why someone might opt to eat fast food over cooking at home. I'm a double cheeseburger from a popular fast food restaurant. I have the nutrition information right here. It provides 25 grams of protein. The average cost is $2.71 in Chicago. So I want us to consider what the trade-offs would be from eating out versus cooking at home. So let's look a little bit closer. So if I was going to make a similar cheeseburger at home with a similar amount of protein, 21 grams of protein, I would need to purchase 1 beef patty burger, which cost $2.21 at our local Jewel, 2 slices of American cheese, 33 cents, one bun that was 35 cents, for a total of $2.89 without even including any toppings. So you can see here, this popular fast food restaurant has already beat, the price of the grocery store if you were going to recreate that. So I want us to consider why our patient might opt to eat fast food over cooking at home. It's more convenient, there's no kitchen mess to clean, and in this case, it's actually cheaper. So as a chef and registered dietitian, I always want patients to cook at home and, include really nutrient-dense vegetables and practice their cooking skills. But you can see here what the trade-off is. Sometimes it's not actually cheaper, or it might be very similar in price. But also to remember, food eaten out is not going to contribute to the grocery budget, and SNAP funds can't be used on this. But we really want to consider the needs of the patient. Rather than judge or shame them for the decisions that they make surrounding their food, we really want to find ways to empower them and help them make the best choice that is going to serve them the best. So remember, with meals, our goal is always to eat enough protein, fiber, and then filling half that plate with fruits and vegetables. So the fast food option didn't provide many fiber or other nutrients from fruits and vegetables, although it did meet the protein guidelines. So again, something to consider, and hopefully just to help give you a little bit of empathy for your patients and the trade-offs that they're considering. So the types of stores that your patients might be shopping at include Aldi, Jewel, Cermak Produce, convenience stores, corner markets, Walmart. So just really think about what is accessible to your patient. It's always a good idea to shop the sales when possible, but oftentimes Aldi and Walmart are going to have the lowest prices with or without sales. So just consider what is accessible to the patient that you are serving. And when we go to the grocery store, we want to shop by unit price. So checking the unit price before you put it into your cart is really the best practice. You're looking for the cost per ounce, pound, or sheet. We really want to try to buy in bulk if we're going to be able to use the entire package, and also consider personal preferences. Are you actually going to eat all of this product? I think Aldi's is great because they put the price per ounce on each price tag on the grocery store shelf, so I think that's very helpful. Minimizing food waste will certainly help you get the most value out of the ingredients that you're shopping for. You can prepare a scavenger lunch, I like to call it, by shopping your refrigerator and pantry and just cooking from the ingredients you have on hand, rather than going to the store and buying all new ingredients to make one recipe and having extra foods that you may not use and just end up in the trash. So really having some cooking skills that allow you to do that is going to help you be efficient and know how to utilize maybe some odds and ends that are left over at the bottom of the vegetable drawer or the back of the refrigerator. I like to use recipe templates as a guide. I'll show you that next. I really like to meal plan and prep. This is just part of my weekly routine. FIFO, this means first in and first out. So we buy foods with a longer shelf life and we store the oldest in front. We also want to make sure that we freeze any uneaten foods so that they do not go to waste. This is an example of a recipe template. So I have a Nourish bowl here and I have ingredient categories listed on the left. So greens, grains, protein, fruits and vegetables, fat, and acid. And then I have a list of what I'm going to choose this day in my notes section. And then examples to kind of prompt me to maybe look in my refrigerator for some of these, or if I'm shopping at the grocery store, see what's on sale, and then use this as my guide. So it's not a strict recipe that you have to follow. It gives you a little bit of leeway with kind of the end goal in mind of how you're going to put all of these together. So the Nourish Bowls, I think, are a really great way to do this. If you have access to a garden or a patio that gets sunshine, you can certainly grow your own herbs, salad, greens, and tomatoes. This is really pretty easy to do in the Midwest, and you don't have to have a green thumb to do this. These are examples of things that we've grown in the UIC Nutrition Teaching Garden. I really like having herbs as a handy resource for students to come snip because they will grow back after you've snipped them. So you don't have to buy a new plant each time. It will regrow after you've taken some of the herbs. And so that's really handy. It's a renewable resource. The same is true for kale and many of the lettuces. Oftentimes they will regrow and actually don't have to be planted again for the growing season. So that's very handy. in general, cooking from scratch and eating up leftovers is a really good way to not increase the amount of money that you have to spend, after you've gone to the grocery store. Maybe what you bought at the grocery store isn't very exciting, but perhaps you can turn it into something else that is delicious and new, so it doesn't feel like leftovers. Tacos, those Nourish Bowl that I showed you, pizza, roasted vegetables, salads, burgers, adding lentils or beans to ground turkey, chicken, or lean beef can kind of stretch some of that more expensive protein. Making mac and cheese with a squash puree, that's really delicious. Soups, sandwiches, wraps, frittatas, these are all really good way to kind of hide leftovers or, maybe small amounts of things that are kind of just odds and ends. This is a tomato soup that I made from tomatoes at the end of the garden season in the UIC Nutrition Teaching Garden. So having some skill in the kitchen and some creativity is always going to help folks, make meals that are really delicious that you'd want to eat and will keep you from spending extra money eating out at fast food or other. One question that I think you might get is organic produce worth the cost? And I just want to remind you that both conventional and organic and regenerative farms all experience pressure from weeds and pests. And so all three types of farms really have to find the best method that works in order to mitigate the damage that weeds and pests will cause. And so they have different methods for doing this. So both are going to utilize pesticides in order to take care of pests. Conventional farms are going to be able to use synthetic pesticides, while organic farms are not going to be able to use synthetic pesticides, but they still are using pesticides on their farms. And I have a link here, the Code of Federal Regulations for allowed and prohibited substances that can be used in organic agriculture. So you can take a look at those and see which pesticides are allowable and which are not. And you can compare them to the pesticide data program, the data that the USDA publishes about the pesticide residues found on conventional agriculture. And you can look at the specific amounts and consider the risks of those. There is a lot of regulation around this, and pesticide residues do have to fall below the federal guidelines. So I really think it comes down to considering how low-income folks are going to view fruits and vegetables, and how the communication that we provide on this topic really will influence their purchase intentions or decisions. We know that consuming fruits and vegetables regularly is a very important part of a healthy diet. There are numerous studies that have shown an inverse association between fruits and vegetable intake and chronic disease development. So, we really don't want to make folks think that, their fruits and vegetables are unsafe if they can't afford organic. It is still a good choice. There is a lot of communication through various media outlets that really conveys the message that organic fruits and vegetables are healthier and safer than non-organic, conventionally grown. And unfortunately, the consumer often takes these at face value. And, they're not trained to really look into the literature very deeply. And so I think we have to consider if these messages are, simply marketing messages that are used to increase the purchase of organic fruits and vegetables, or if we're really delivering science-based evidence regarding the risks of pesticide residues found on both organic and conventional produce, and if these fall within safe levels for human consumption. So that's really kind of the crux of the issue here. I would just say make sure that it's not marketing information that you're promoting over evidence-based research. And we certainly don't want to steer patients away from consuming fruits and vegetables. So I would say just be cautious about this and maybe spend a little bit more time reading about it if this is something that interests you. Just to summarize some of the things that we've talked about, the realities of healthy eating on a budget really are going to demand some cooking skill from the consumer. They're going to need some equipment, and they're going to need to have some time spent meal prepping if they're going to take advantage of these ingredients that maybe are less convenient and less processed. Low-cost food plans, in reality, are not going to be able to take advantage of convenience foods to the same degree that a liberal budget plan could. So we really have to assess what convenience foods are possible and, nutrient dense that will fit on the grocery list. Remember, those hyper palatable, ultra processed foods are fast. They might be really delicious, but these come at a cost, oftentimes financially and nutritionally both. So we are going to have to be careful about keeping those out of our cart. I think there's less room for treat foods and wasted food in that low-cost food plan. Patients or clients on a low-cost food plan may not have essential cooking equipment. They may not have enough time to do this, or their cooking skills may just be lacking. So we really have to individualize the care and recommendations that we're giving to patients. And at the end of the day, I think we really want to avoid passing judgment on patients for their food choices. The consumer is really going to eat what tastes good to them and brings them a lot of comfort. So I think it's our job to try to grow our awareness of our patients' and clients' values or their preferences for food, because these really differ widely among patients. I think that we also have to understand that building healthy eating habits, which are going to feature some of these nutrient-dense ingredients that we talked about on a low-cost budget, will require some time and skill in the kitchen. And, we have to remember, not everyone has these luxuries. And again, individualizing recommendations is important. At the end of the day, we really want to promote the consumption of fruits and vegetables, lean protein, and fiber-filled nutrient-dense plants, like whole grains. So I think it's important to ask your patients what their preference is and what they feel they can achieve in each of these areas. All right, so I've just told you the importance of needing to be efficient and having skills in the kitchen in order to, put together these really nutrient-dense, delicious meals. And so I want to show you some basic knife skills that I think will make you more efficient in the kitchen and hopefully reduce the amount of time that you have to spend cooking. There is a specific way to hold the chef's knife, and I'm going to demonstrate that next in the kitchen. So let's get cooking. Before we cut any of our vegetables, let's take a second and talk about what knife we're going to choose for each job. So this is the chef's knife that I mentioned earlier. This is really our workhorse in the kitchen. This is a serrated knife, and you can see that serration here on the blade. This is most appropriate for breads. So I don't use this one very often, pretty much just when I'm slicing breads. This is a flexible boning knife. You can see here that the blade has some flexibility, whereas this one is pretty sturdy. It's not bending at all. This flexible boning knife has some give. And this is really useful when you're breaking down a chicken or taking chicken meat off of the carcass or filleting a fish. But this is not a knife that I use a whole lot in the kitchen, only when I'm doing either of those activities. This is a paring knife, and this is much shorter, very easy to hold onto, perfect for small jobs. But again, this is really not my go-to knife. The chef's knife is the one that I'm going to use for each of the items that I'll show you in this part of the video. I also have this bench scraper. This is really handy for helping me pick up my produce and safely transferring it to my skillet or wherever I'm putting it. And then I have a peeler handy here as well. So we'll set these knives aside. We're not going to use any of these. So I pick up my chef's knife and I'll put my first finger right here on the blade and then my thumb on the other side. So I'm kind of developing a nice callus right here on that first finger. And so I'm gripping the knife like this, and I have 3 fingers that are just wrapped around the handle. With my non-dominant hand, I'm going to turn my fingertips underneath to make kind of a claw motion. And then I am going to use them to steady my produce while keeping my fingertips tucked underneath so that they don't get caught underneath my knife. That would be disastrous. So this non-dominant hand's fingers are being kept tucked underneath, and then my dominant hand is free to make a nice rocking motion. So I want you to pay attention to the tip of my knife. Notice when I draw my knife back, the tip of the knife is on the cutting board, and then I move my wrist down, and the back of the knife pushes forward, and the back of the knife is touching the cutting board on that forward motion. So pulling back, tip of my knife is on the cutting board. Pushing forward, the back of my knife is touching the cutting board. And just spend a little bit of time with your chef's knife getting used to this nice rocking motion, keeping these fingertips tucked underneath so you don't chop one off. And practice this before you pick up anything that you're going to cut. Just spend a little time getting comfortable with this motion. And you can back up the video and watch me do it one more time. So again, I am pulling the knife back with the tip of the knife touching the cutting board, pushing it forward with the back of the knife on my cutting board, and continuing that. The front of the knife is for more delicate, fine cuts. So let's say you have a piece of garlic here and you want to just make some, very small, delicate cuts. You want to mince it. So you're going to use this tip of the knife, or the most delicate part of the knife, for delicate cuts, like I'm doing here. So you can see how this delicate tip of the knife is best for this small, fine knife work. And then here I'm going to just kind of finish chopping that. Super easy. And now this is opposed to a carrot, where the carrot is, pretty firm, and it really presents more of a challenge, and it needs more force with the knife. So I'm going to use the back portion of my knife because I have more leverage and more force here. So if I did this, it would be more difficult for my wrists to wield the knife so that I could cut this, really correctly. But with using the back of my knife, I have more power, and so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to make that type of a cut. And perhaps it doesn't seem like a big deal, for a couple slices, but if you have several carrots to cut like this, you're going to want to employ this rocking motion because it's going to be the most gentle on your wrist. So the first one that I want to show you is an onion. And I know that these are sometimes pretty difficult to cut. They can make you cry. But this is kind of an essential vegetable that we use in the kitchen. This is the basis for stocks and soups and really gives a lot of flavor to most of the things that we cook, most of the savory items. So I start with peeling the onion. Because the onion grows in the dirt, there's potentially bacteria and dirt on the outside. So before I slice into the onion, I like to take that peel off. So I have a root here and the tip, and I'm just going to put those in my compost bowl. I'm going to very carefully just slice a little bit of that root end off and the top off as well. And so I like to think of this as the North Pole and the South Pole. So I'm going to slice from the north down to the south, so from the top end down to the roots, and I have two halves of the onion. This first cut is called a julienne, and I'm just making half moon shapes. So notice how I'm holding the knife, I'm holding the knife on the actual blade, and I'm just using a nice rocking motion to make these half moon shapes. And I have the most flat part of the vegetable touching the cutting board. Okay, so I'm holding the knife like this. I'm grasping that actual blade. So first finger on this side of the blade, thumb to support it, and 3 fingers wrapped around the handle. And then I'm doing this nice rocking motion. These fingertips are tucked underneath, so they're not getting underneath the blade. That would be disastrous. And these are my juliennes. As I said, they're like half moons. See how easy this bench scraper is to use? And then for this one, I'm just going to do a dice. And so I like to kind of bring the onion down to the edge of my cutting board. I place my hand really nice and flat on top, and I go almost all the way to the root end. And again, not slicing all the way through. So I have 2 horizontal cuts, and then I'm making vertical cuts. And I will finish the grid pattern like this. So I'm getting really nice cubes of onion. And if that's too difficult of a cut, that's all right. You can kind of just do a rough chop as well. But you just want your onion to be in nice kind of small pieces. So this is like a large dice. So 2 really easy ways to cut onions. I think if you are really trying to get it done quickly, the julienne is going to be the easiest thing. All right, let's talk about these beautiful little mushrooms next. For these, I like to quarter mushrooms. This is, kind of a minimal amount of work, and we're always trying to be more efficient in the kitchen. So that's how you would quarter them. You could also slice. And notice I'm just using this nice rocking motion with my knife. So I'm pulling it back, the knife tip is touching the cutting board, pushing my weight into the knife and pressing forward with this back portion, now touching the cutting board. So it's kind of like a nice rock. So before you even start cutting, you can just practice that motion and get really good at that. That's a good thing to spend some time with. All right, the next item that I have is a carrot. You can choose to peel the carrot if you would like to. The way that you would do that is just run your peeler kind of down the carrot like this. However, these are really young, beautiful carrots, and I actually want to leave this peel on. The peel has a lot of really great fiber, and we know that fiber helps keep us full. So I'm going to leave this peel intact, and a really quick, easy method for cutting carrots is to cut them in the oblique way. So I have my knife kind of on a diagonal, and I'm just turning the carrot and cutting on an angle like this. So all of my carrots are about the same size. They're not the same shape, but if they're all about the same weight, they will cook at the same rate. So I don't want huge pieces and small pieces because the small pieces are going to cook too quickly, but I do want them to be all about the same size so that they will cook at the same speed. All right, and this is called an oblique, and that is a really quick way to cut up some carrots with the skin on to use in your recipes. I also have some turnip greens here. Collard greens or Swiss chard or kale can all be treated the same way. Some of these greens will have a really fibrous center here called the rib. And one thing that you can do if you don't want to eat that is to just kind of slice a V into the green and use this. If you don't want to tear it, one thing that you could do is called a chiffonade. And so you'll open each leaf and you'll lay several leaves open on top of one another. And then I have 3, you could probably do at least 5 leaves. And I'll roll them up. And then I'm just going to use my knife to make nice ribbons with the greens. And I like this method because it leaves a little bit more of that stem. And that stem has a lot of good fiber. So important for keeping you full and not hungry after the meal. So you can see here, these are ribbons of the turnip greens, but this method would also work really well for kale, collard greens, anything that, kind of has kind of a fibrous texture. And the stems, you certainly can use those as well. Maybe you just want to kind of slice them on the bias like this. So they're a little bit smaller, easier to chew, but that way we're not wasting them. So certainly a good way to utilize those as well. Very edible. No part of this plant really needs to go into the garbage or the compost. Another tricky item can be fresh herbs. What do we do with this bundle of parsley? The parsley stems do have a lot of flavor, but they can be kind of fibrous. So for some salads like tabbouleh, you can chop up the stems. You could also pick the parsley from the stems. You could do this with cilantro too. Rosemary, thyme, those are herbs that you might not really want to eat the stem on because it's kind of bitter and quite fibrous and woody. And then I'll just do a rough chop through my herbs. Again, I'll kind of use this chop method just to run my knife through. And this is a really good way to make sure you're not bruising those herbs. A sharp knife is going to prevent you from bruising them and subsequently making them turn brown. Next we have a potato, and you could use the same method for sweet potato as you do for this Yukon Gold potato. So I always make sure that I wash it really well, and of course you could peel it, but like I said with the carrot, there's a lot of really great fiber on the outside in this peel. So I'm actually going to leave the peel and I'm just going to chop it. So I like to think about how I can be most efficient with my knife skills. So I can cut off the ends and we'll deal with those in a second. But I always like to give myself a nice flat base so that my vegetable or fruit isn't rolling around on the cutting board. So that's not very safe. Remember, these knives are really sharp. So by cutting this knife's flat surface, I'm able to kind of handle this in a way that is more safe. And so then I'm just going to cut from the top going down. We never want to hold anything in our hand and, try to use the knife to like cut into the piece of produce and potentially let it slip and cut our hand. We always want to make sure that our knife is going toward the cutting board. So this allows you to do that. So I have 4 kind of planks here, as you can see. And again, I'm using that nice flat surface. I'm going to turn this into cubes. But they're roughly all the same size, as you can see here. These are all about the same weight, and so they are going to cook at the same rate. I'm going to store these in water, in a bowl of cold water, to prevent them from oxidizing before I use them. Let's move on to the fruit. So this is an apple, and I see a lot of people spend money on apple cutters and all kinds of extra, tools that probably a knife could achieve the same thing for you. So I'm going to show you just how to very simply cut apple slices using this sharp chef's knife that you're learning to practice with. So I know that the apple has a core, and so I'm going to cut around the core. But first I'm going to make that slice so that I have a nice flat surface like I talked about with the potato. And so then notice I'm just turning my apple so that I'm always working on a nice flat surface. Okay, and so then this core you can throw away or compost, and then you can just take each of these and turn them into nice thin slices. And these are perfect, to dip in a nut butter or just eat plain. And last but not least, I have an avocado. And sometimes I think these are really intimidating to cut, so I'm going to show you the easiest way to do this. I know that there is a large pit on the inside, so I like to just take my knife and kind of make a nice slice all the way around the avocado. So I'm kind of spinning it on my knife. As you can see here, a sharp knife is essential for this. And then I'm just going to open the 2 halves like this. And so I have 1 half that's ready to go, but this side still has the pit. And so I need to get that pit out. So you want to make sure that your hands are, kind of at the bottom of the avocado. But I just take my knife and I let the knife pierce the pit. And then I'll just use my cutting board to kind of get that off. So you just want to make sure you're being really careful. And then this is the only time that I will tell you to pick up your knife and use it to cut something that is not sitting on the cutting board. So very, very carefully, you're going to use this portion of your knife for this fine, delicate cut. So I'm going to make a nice grid pattern so that I can easily scoop out the flesh of the avocado. And I'm going to take a spoon. I can very easily scoop out this flesh. And so I was just really careful to not let the tip of the knife pierce this skin. If you don't want cubes, you could just make slices. So again, very carefully, I'm using the tip of the knife. From here, it's always nice to put a little bit of lime juice on it to keep it from oxidizing. This is definitely a fruit that you want to cut last because it is so prone to oxidation. Take time to practice these knife skills on your own. Practice holding your knife correctly and really using that rocking motion. You're going to be able to get quick with the knife and accomplish a lot in a short amount of time. Good luck in your cooking practice. I'll see you in the kitchen.